No-show Biden. It's been 172 days since a train carrying toxic chemicals derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, prompting a controlled burn and resulting environmental crisis among residents. President Joe Biden, though, has yet to visit the town, a slight the mayor of East Palestine isn't happy about.
East Palestine's mayor says there is probably more the White House could do to help expedite the cleanup, but it has been 170 days now since President Biden said he would come visit, and there still aren't any plans in place for that visit to happen.
They're a no-show here, and they haven't been around, haven't really heard from them. But now that everything's calmed down, it would be nice to have him come, show that he cares about the village, and he can see what's actually going on here.
East Palestine's.
Now, you'll remember last week we spoke to a status quo reporter, Louis DeAngelis, who's been on the ground in East Palestine in the months following the crisis. Here's just one of his interviews with the residents.
Relocation inevitably, and I hope that's not the case, but when the relocation inevitably ends, that's kind of unclear for you still.
I guess then you go back home, you sit, you wait, and hope the hell you don't get cancer and die. I'm not worried so much about me. It's my family. My grandkids. Do I want to see them suffer? No, I don't. Biden needs to step up and help. We're United States. Help us.
So obviously this is happening at the same time that Biden did visit Maui, a trip that the perception of which is, among at least some people, a lot of people, is that it's not going very well, that he appeared kind of incoherent, very old, not super clued in to the suffering of the people, told an anecdote that was kind of ill-timed. There was a lot of debate over whether he actually fell asleep during this ceremony. Mainstream media has said that he's not and was thunderously angry at those of us who suggested that maybe he was. You can judge for yourself looking at the video footage. But the residents of Palestine, Ohio, or at least the mayor, do want him still to visit. Yes. So everyone probably remembers that Donald Trump did make a visit there in typical and classic, I should say. Ordered a cheeseburger.
Knew the McDonald's menu better than the people who worked at McDonald's themselves. I think he said that to laughter and applause. It was a trip that made him seem, in some people's eyes, presidential again. And the contrast between somebody who was no longer president, being in that moment, being present to listen to the people's concerns, and the real president not showing up was, I think, a little bit of a turnaround point for Donald Trump. Because remember when he first launched, people said that he was low energy. They said that his initial launch event was not as well attended or not as raucous as they've come to expect from Trump events. People were thinking, Ron DeSantis is going to be the guy. But over time, events like this, I think, reminded folks about why they liked Trump in the first place. And I think because of Trump's visit, East Palestine in particular got politicized in this interesting way, where I don't want to impute bad faith to any, Republican voters, but historically, there has not necessarily been as much commitment from Republican electeds to spending domestically on crises. But because it was a moment to say Biden isn't doing enough and the Republicans are doing more, there has been all this advocacy for doing more for the people of East Palestine and criticisms of the EPA in terms of not doing enough in terms of testing and not getting enough involved, actually advocating for more government accountability and involvement in this particular arena. And I wish so badly that Democrats had taken that as an opportunity to say, great, we want to do domestic spending to resolve domestic crises. Let's talk about Flint. Let's talk about Jackson. I'm sure you guys are all going to vote for spending on all of these places all around the country that have decomposing infrastructure, where it's the pipe infrastructure or the bridges falling down in Pennsylvania. It's go time. And of course I want to help the citizens of East Palestine, regardless of what their voting record is. But instead we've had this upside down world where there has been this choice that I don't understand to just cede East Palestine to the conservatives, to go to Maui, but only after your vacation in Tahoe, to which you returned. It's not even clear to me if Biden weren't on the West Coast, would he have gone to Hawaii would have seemed too far away a trip. There's something that seems almost like convenient. Like, we'll stop by Hawaii since we're already out west.
It's still a long way. Hawaii is out there.
For sure.
Yeah, what I found most, you talk about ceding the whole East Palestine issue to conservatives. An aspect of it that I found really interesting is you brought up the EPA. Right, the EPA, that's the government scientists. They all say it's fine. They say it's safe, it's fine, you can drink the water, everything's fine. And of course, mainstream liberals now their like cardinal belief is we must trust the government scientists.
Yeah.
And government scientists say it's fine. And we've had Louis DeAngelis on the show. He can show you if you look at the water, it's got that quality where it looks like oil or
rainbow
the rainbowy thing.
Yeah.
It's celebrating a little Pride Month there in the water. It doesn't look clean to me, but the government scientists say it. So can't we trust? How could we live with ourselves if we started contradicting the science, right?
Yeah, look, I think we are 100% on the same door when we talk about the way that these government industries are co-opted, particularly by people that work for the industries that the government organizations are supposed to be regulating. This is a huge issue. In fact, my former environmental law professor was just the center of controversy on the left because she was on the board of, I don't want to misstate it, but I think an oil company. And people were outraged. Your whole shtick is teaching people about the regulatory state and all of the ways that kind of corporate interests have tried to chip away at it so that they can pollute more freely and be under-regulated. And here you go, using that expertise ostensibly to help benefit one of the very organizations that you taught us 15 years ago was such a bad thing. Freeman is her name.
In general, the EPA is not a friend to industry. The EPA's main role is to make it more difficult to build houses, factories, everything, to require, it's the law, not the EPA, but the environmental impact reports, which are really costly and really slow down. Building of houses, it could be low-income houses, they could, I know you and I have different views of deregulation, but there is a getting in the way of building things we need even to make like working people's lives a little bit better that is part of the environmental impact.
Look, what is true is that it is a difficult cost-benefit analysis that has to be done whenever you're doing these kinds of projects. And this came up on the show recently as we had Michael Schellenberger on, who was really lamenting the effect that energy development, wind turbines were having potentially, allegedly, on the whale population on the East Coast. And he was making the argument that these wind turbines shouldn't be built because it was causing these whale deaths. And I said, well, that's interesting, but this seems very much in contradiction to the argument that many conservatives make that you shouldn't stop development and progress and infrastructure projects simply because it's going to kill some endangered frogs.
Well, he doesn't describe himself as a conservative. I was skeptical of that for that reason because I'm skeptical of trying to preserve or of overly putting our thumb on the scales of stopping development for environmental reasons. I'm skeptical.
Yeah,
whether we're talking about whales or whatever else.
Michael Schellenberger's general approach, he's described it, he believes that economic growth can continue without negative environmental impacts. He's like a pro-technology, pro-development, pro-nuclear energy kind of a guy, despite the fact that all of those things also have negative environmental impacts, right? Like there's no perfectly clean energy. That doesn't exist. That's the whole point. And so the question isn't energy good, energy bad, nukes good, nukes bad. It's what are the cost benefits analysis and how can we make the world safer while having minimal harm.
Well, and his argument, we have him on all the time, so I shouldn't try to summarize his arguments because we can just have him on. But I think his argument, is that moving from, it's directional. You should move from coal to natural gas to nuclear. You should get cleaner by doing that directionally.
And wind turbines are obviously very clean. That's not the issue. The question is whether or not it seems the building of the turbines, not the turbines themselves, but the construction of the turbine interrupted the whale's habitat in these ways. So that we're getting far away from the point, but the question is whether or not there is a now understood desire, it's an understood need for there to be some institution, some company somewhere that is willing to do what the EPA in this instance was unwilling to do, which is to say, run the kind of tests that Louis DeJoy said weren't actually being run for all of the chemicals that were involved in the crash, and not just some of them, and measuring all of the places that it could have landed and infiltrated people's homes and water and environment, not just some of them. Because there is an interest, especially when there is potential federal aid on the line, for even the government to downplay the costs of something like this, especially if they're unwilling to make the companies pay for the cost to the extent that they should, because and the Lever did a great job of covering all of this. The deep entrenchment of the railroad industry's influence in the government, particularly with some regional Congress members who've been fighting tooth and nail to prevent some of the regulations that could potentially have stopped the derailment in the first place from ever coming into effect, because the short-term costs were something they didn't want to pay, even though the long-term cost of having derailments like this, if they were actually forced to pay for them, would make it more than worth their while. So it's not easy. I really enjoy these conversations with you, Robby, because I do feel like it starts to expose the extent to which this really flat argument about, well, government is good and is going to solve everything, or government is bad and is not going to solve everything, really ignores the extent to which it's human beings that are being elected and appointed as a consequence of our representative democracy that are ultimately going to be most accountable and able to do what the human beings that elected them wanted them to do. And the farther we get away from representative democracy, the farther we get away from having a one person, one vote principle, the more we have a political institution that can be so easily corrupted, in part, I would argue, because of the influence of money in politics. You're going to be in a world where it feels like nothing works. The private sector isn't working, the public sector isn't working, people throw up their hands and they are exhausted and they check out. And I think that is also part of by design, because if we all check out, then who gets to drive the ship? Not us.
Right. Well, and the kind of roadblocks that entities like the EPA put up are not particularly democratic all the time, because obviously these are bureaucrats. I mean, ideally you have, like, let's say we want to, want to have a low housing development or something, or a new mall or a community pool or something, and you hold a public comment period about the city council has people come in and looks like there's public support to do it, and if there isn't and they do it anyway, then you would vote out those city council in a democracy, but they can't do it, or maybe they can do it but like 15 years from now after they complete all the paperwork because of bureaucracies like the EPA. That's actually voiding the democratic process.
So to me, the fact that there are mechanisms like notice and comment periods suggest democracy. This suggests that there is an opportunity for people to weigh in a way that is beneficial. If the people in the community would rather save the endangered frog, okay, that's on them. If people in the community would rather have the bridge, well, then that's on them. And there's something to me, even if I disagree with the decision, that sits well with me in a way that other kinds of decisions that aren't democratic don't sit with me.
I mean, the law requires...
But it also takes time, right?
That's the thing.
Allow notice and comment period. So these are all the trade-offs.
Well, it's not so much, the notice and comment period is fine, but they require, I'm specifically harping on the policy of requiring the environmental impact report, which is pointless anyway, because then it's this giant, 8 trillion page document that gets produced that no one's going to read anyway. It just slows the process for no reason, and it costs a lot of money for the entity that's going to do it. And then the whatever expert gets selected has a lot of sway over that. I mean, there's going to be legitimate disagreements on what the actual environmental impact of this thing will be, because it's very speculative, and it's costly to produce it. It takes forever. The report that is actually produced gets entered into the record, but no one on earth is going to read it. It seems like it's a lot of paperwork that slows things down that I'm saying is not democratic. It's government, but it's not democratic.
So do you think that there should be environmental impact reports, but the process needs to be sped up, or they need to be shorter? Or do you think that there should be no assessment of the environmental impact of a construction project?
I'm saying the way it is now, the assessment is mostly used as a cudgel to thwart all development, even the development of things that not just another oil
but that's
factory,
my question. That's the way it's used now. So are you saying that you recognize the utility of assessing whether or not a project is going to have some horrible downstream effects?
I mean, you can assess it in the process of the city council or whatever the entity is deciding they want to do it, right? The community can speak up and say, oh no, this would not be a good idea for this reason.
Wait a minute. An environmental impact report, it's not a layman's understanding of what's going to happen. It's someone has to come in and actually research what the environmental impact is, who has the ability to assess that.
I'm saying how we put public land, what use it's put for, should be back in the hands of the people and their representatives, not unelected bureaucracies.
Yeah, I agree, but what I'm asking is, the people might want to know the environmental impact of something before it gets built. Like, how are they going to make an informed decision? So it seems to me, what I'm getting at is, what it seems to me is, if you have an issue with the time it takes to do an environmental impact report, that's not an argument against environmental impact reports. That's an argument against how they're done.
Okay, it's an argument against how they're done.
Yeah, so I think that's really useful, because I think so many of these conversations, it's like we're disagreeing. We're not really disagreeing. You saying something like bureaucracy is time consuming and it slows things up and sometimes that's bad. Yeah, that's an intuitively correct statement. Of course, sometimes stuff takes too long and that has a bad outcome. But instead of saying, well, therefore we shouldn't have government, I'm like, well, I'm open to your.
Say therefore we shouldn't have government.
I'm obviously. I don't mean to say that you literally said that, but you're generally a small government person. So, but instead of like leaning all the way and throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I wish we could all be open and say, yeah, there's some downsides to the administrative state. How do we improve them?
Yeah, there are a lot of downsides. We should work toward improving them. Cool. All right, more rising after this.